This week we look at class in America in the 20th century, and we realize that this was a time where big businesses flourished. Manufacturing rose from 3 billion to 13 billion. The rise of big business was accompanied by an emergence of a new class of millionaires. So, for example, at the beginning of the Civil War, there were only 400 millionaires in the United States. By 1892, there were 4,047. Many of these millionaires were described as the men who built America, or the captains of industry, and they included men like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, as well as people like J.P. Morgan and Henry Ford. Now, their tactics were not always fair, and they were often accused of corruption, but there were few laws regulating business conduct at that time. No wonder then that Mark Twain described this period as the Gilded Age, a period marked by huge social problem masked by a thin gold gilding. Now, to showcase the success that they were experiencing, people wore elaborate clothing, and we're looking at an image of a evening dress or a dinner dress that was worn by women at that time. It was elaborate, intricately designed, and we'll also take a look at a pair of shoes that was designed by the famous shoe manufacturer Herman Delman, who designed fine crafted, chic, luxurious footwear for the wealthy women at that time. And this was how, in addition to building huge mansions, they showcased the wealth that they had. Now, in 1929, economists considered $2,500 to be the income that was necessary to support a family. However, 60% of the United States earned less than $2,000 a year. 40% earned less than $1,500 a year, and things were even worse for specific groups of people. A 1928 report showed that 71% of Native Americans lived on less than $200 a year. All of this while, as was said before, the economy was booming and inflation was practically non-existent. Now, not everyone, and we're referring in this case to whites in America, not every one of them had the opportunity to live this wealth, and so they had to settle to live in tenements like the one at 97 Orchard Street, which is pictured here. Now, persons at that time, they, started unions because they were unhappy with the working condition, the corruption, the unfair treatment of workers at the hands of the upper and middle classes. So there was social unrest in the 20th century. Now, for many who were enjoying this immense wealth, things were about to change. And this happens because of what we know about as the Great Depression. It started in 1929, and particularly in the United States, it lasted until 1941. Now, while they put remedies in place to try to cauterize the problem, it was in full swing by Tuesday, October 29, referred to as Black Tuesday. Now, there are persons who have expressed what it was like to live through the Great Depression on that time. And on his radio program, This American Life, Studs Terkel interviewed persons who have lived through that time. They describe people who once enjoyed a middle-class existence as living in shanty towns called Hoovervilles, and this name was named after President Hoover, who was blamed for the Depression. These structures were made from woods, from crate, cardboard, scrap metals, or whatever material they could find. There was also a report that some people were living in sewer pipes because homelessness was so rampant at that time. Now, most of these unemployed residents of the Hoovervilles used public charities, or they had to beg for food during this era. What was interesting to note in these interviews is that even though they were living in these circumstances, there were whites who still felt that they were superior to minorities. I was particularly fascinated by the interview done with one woman named Peggy, who described how she felt about blacks and Mexicans. She felt that the blacks should not be entitled to the same federal resources that whites were getting, and that Mexicans were, quote, spics, and that they should go back to where they came from. On the other hand, it was interesting to hear the story of a black man whose father owned a grocery store in the South and how he extended kindness to white families in need by giving them food for their children, feeding the same people who had oppressed them and were oppressing them at that time. So what we have seen over the course of this unit is the rise of class in America that was evident by vulgar displays of success. We also realize that the 20th century is a period marked by disruptions and rampant corruption, extreme poverty for many. We realize that throughout all of this, African Americans, Mexican Americans, and Native Americans have suffered the most. They're the ones who have always, no matter how successful this country gets, have lived below the poverty line. We also look at the period of the Great Depression and how this period leveled the playing field, so to speak, where in many instances there was no class divide, as people who were once considered middle class were now on the same level as the so-called lower classes, and in the sense that they were competing for scarce resources. So no doubt the 20th century is a defining moment in American history. It changed the way people do business. It produced captains of industry, but it was also marked by failures that we are seeing evident in society even today.